be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. St. John's, I have 4 Sundays left with you beginning today. And the urgency of that departure is pressing in on me, and I'm thinking very carefully about what I want to say to you in each of these last 4 Sundays that I have to be your priest. I can relate to Paul. I'm no Paul, but I can relate to him in the way that he would write with urgency the things that he thought were most important for the communities to hear. And the message that comes is inspired by our gospel that we read today, and it's also the deepest longing of my heart. In John's gospel, Aubrey knows this, we talk about this all the time, but John's gospel is so different from the other 3. The other 3 are very concrete and tangible, a baby in a manger and traveling to Bethlehem, right? John's gospel is cosmic. It's immense. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then that beautiful line, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. What does that mean? The meaning of the incarnation, the message of the incarnation, the theology of the incarnation is that God became one of us. Emmanuel, the very meaning of the word, of the name of God, means God with us. It's a very intimate relationship, and that's what the whole thing is about. It's about relationship. And my message, the deepest longing of my heart for you, St. John's, is that you will continue to deepen your relationships with God and with each other, building community, building broader, wider, deeper community with one another. I was reading an article a few months ago. It's called The Confessions of a Loner by Sophia Lee. It was in Christianity Today. And I got to tell you guys, when I read this article, it changed my life. It's not hyperbolic. Like, it changed me. I was so obsessed with this article. I read it probably 5 times. I asked Gerardo to read it. I asked Holly to read it. I sent it to several of you to read. It changed my life. This is a woman who wrote this article, a very personal article. And the opening line is, "I don't remember when I realized I didn't have a community." And she goes on to talk about how she has friends. She says, "I've been a bridesmaid many times over. I have friendships from my teen years and from my 20s, and we're now scattered across the country, across oceans, at different stages of our lives. And they're my friends, but they're not my community." She says that exchanging funny Instagram reels and Facebook posts is not the same thing as physical presence. The beautiful ministry of a hug, of a held hand, of interactions together. We're all so darn busy, she writes. And it takes weeks to get something scheduled, and then when you do, plans often get canceled at the last minute, sometimes for very good reasons. And so she goes in search of real community. And she finds this little band of friends in a town called Denton, Texas. Have you ever been to Denton, Texas? Some of my family come from there. It's yiddle, y'all. This band of friends that have been sharing a book club and a meal on Sunday nights for decades. They wouldn't miss it. They don't miss it. And now their kids have become part of it, and they go to each other's basketball games and bridal showers and funerals for relatives. It's a kind of liturgy. They wouldn't call it that, but that's what it is, breaking bread and sharing the word. And she writes about how they have cultivated that. It's not by mistake, it's by design. And she says she's interviewing them and realizes that little tight-knit group was interrupted for a few years by one of the couples that moved to Washington State. I guess it's over here. I have no sense of direction. They moved to Washington State, to a beautiful community. And they thought, well, we can just reestablish community there. We know how to build community. We'll be missionaries for community. And they tried to start this book club and this meal, and they would invite people, and people would come once or twice. And then there would be a regret, and people would cancel plans, and it never they never got bound together. And they couldn't figure out why. They said they felt like they had gotten stood up at the dance, right? And then COVID came. And they had the jobs, they had this gorgeous home, they would take walks in the forest and on the beach, Puget Sound, but they missed their community. And one day, one of the people in the couple said, "Get me out of here. I want to go back to Denton. I want to go to our people." And so they made that move. And she said the writer of this, who's interviewing them, is, interrogating herself. And she said, you know what? I have moved 12 times in my adulthood, sometimes for jobs, sometimes for the house, sometimes for the money, sometimes because it's a beautiful place to live. And never once did I consider community. Never once did I say, I'm going to where my people are. This institution had been refined over 2 decades. And what defines it? What defines community? Frequency, consistency, intentionality. You choose to be in community. You wouldn't have it any other way. You wouldn't miss it. And the people you build community with may or may not be people that you would otherwise be friends with. Community transcends class and gender and race and life circumstances, but you build it intentionally. And the bonds of those relationships are continually strengthened and stretched. And building community is hard. It's messy. Sometimes conflicts arise, and sometimes gossip happens, and you have to weed that out. You have to be devoted to it. Devoted to it. And the author of this article said that she didn't know, she started to come to the realization that she didn't have community herself when her husband's mother died. And they were going to a church, And people would call and say, oh, I'm so sorry to read in the prayers of the people that your husband's mother died. Can we bring you a meal? She said, we declined the meal. We didn't want people coming over. And we didn't want people asking us, getting up into our business, so we declined that. And then she said a couple years later, they had their first child. And once again, the people in the church said, oh, blessings to you, cards, letters. Can we bring you some meals for just the first few days? And they declined. She's like, I was leaking everywhere, and I didn't want people looking at me. It was all gross and, germs. Stay away from the baby. And so they said no. And then she writes, I realize now that turning down the offer was a grave mistake. People wanted a reason to come knocking at our door, to invite themselves over, and I had closed the gate on them. Some texted about how David was doing, but they didn't know how to respond when I told them that he was still grieving because there was no relationship there. And a woman at the church saw her one day and said, we should meet up sometime. And she said it felt like a common lie because it was said so glibly as we passed in the hall. Yes, we are busy. But to be too busy for community is simply to prioritize things other than community. Choose it. Choose it. Own it. Be in community with each other. Go to each other's family members' funerals and baby showers, and knock on each other's doors and bring each other casseroles. Deepen your community with each other. Prioritize it over soccer. And I'm not judging you. I'm just saying prioritize it over everything. Because remember, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, with us. We are meant to be in relationship with one another. And it's going to feel awkward. It's going to be awkward and messy. And sometimes you won't jibe with the person right away. Our lives are only going to get more chaotic and more busy, and depending on what we choose, she writes, we might become even more isolated. We might, unless we choose community. And I've been talking about this for the last several weeks with so many of you. I'm looking at you, Jelaine. Jelaine and I talk about this all the time. I want you to tell them what you say about community, because it means so much. It means so much to all of us.
I was thinking recently that, which I was resistant to after I got accepted into our church and brought in, I liked it just the way it was. I didn't want it to change. And then people kept coming and joining us, and Beth kept encouraging me to talk to folks and reach out and go sit by somebody and look people in the eyes, etc. And then I realized recently that the only way to tighten our circle in our church is to widen it, to make room for each other. And I've been on the receiving end of that for so many years with my family, and I just am so thankful for that. This church has shown up for us in so many ways, and we want to be able to do that for each of you too.
Thank you so much. Widen the circle. You can't say, oh, I have my friends. We're done. We have our dinner group. We don't need any more people. We can't do that. There are so many new people here. And it might be, you might be sitting there and you think, what is she talking about? Isolation and loneliness. I don't feel lonely. Let me say this to you, all of us. Loneliness is pervasive. Isolation is a way of life for a lot of people. Even if you're married, even if you have a great job, we have to build community. We have to invite others in. We have to tighten and strengthen new bonds. We have to insist on that. Please insist on that. I'll give you another example. One night, we were celebrating an impromptu celebration of Jonathan, one of our newer members, who just got engaged to Danny. And half the people in the room were from St. John's. And Monica was there, and her tears were in her eyes. And I said, "What's wrong, Monica?" And she said, "At St. John's, I found community that I didn't know I needed." She said that. Deepen your bonds, strengthen them, let people in. Let me read this last line that Sophia Lee, who wrote this gorgeous article that changed my life, said. She said, "A few days before Christmas last year, I found out we were going to have another baby. And our life is only going to get more chaotic. And it might, depending on our choices, become more isolated. But we have to do this. Round 2, here we go. And this time, I'll accept the casseroles." Accept the casseroles. I love you so much. Amen.